behalf of Indira Gandhi National Open University and my personal behalf, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the speaker this afternoon, Mr. Gurcharan Das. Mr. Gurcharan Das, we all know him as an author, a public intellectual. He studied philosophy at Harvard University and later attended the Harvard Business School. He's one of those who believes that we should have a strong foundation in social sciences and the humanities. Author of the much acclaimed book, The Difficulty of Being Good, on the Subtle Art of Dharma, his earlier book, India Unbound, was an international bestseller, published in many languages and filmed by BBC. Mr. Das was CEO of Procter & Gamble India and later Managing Director, Procter & Gamble Worldwide Strategic Planning. After 5 decades of service, he opted for voluntary retirement and then commenced his career or his journey in writing. The little that I know of Mr. Gurcharan Das through his readings, Mahabharata is central to most of his writings. He describes, the epic is obsessed with questions of right and wrong. It analyzes human failures constantly. Sir, on behalf of the university, I'd like to warmly welcome you here this afternoon. This is the 12th lecture that we are having in the series. I know that Mr. Das believes that intelligence in India is overrated, and if we have to make a difference, it is willpower which will create the, the much needed difference in implementation. There are 4 pillars of the GNHP: promotion of sustainable development, preservation and promotion of cultural values, conservation of natural environment, and establishment of good governance. So that's where I think happiness emanates from good governance, and we look forward to your speech here this afternoon, sir.
First of all, on behalf of the Indira Gandhi National Open University and on my personal behalf, welcome Mr. Gurcharan Das to give the Indira Gandhi National Open University Silver Jubilee lecture. As Dr. Lata Pillai mentioned, this is the 12th lecture in this series. For the last 1 year, we have been, we can say, celebrating the Silver Jubilee year of the university. This university was founded in 1985 on 19th November. This Friday, we are concluding the Silver Jubilee celebrations. We had initiated a number of activities in the university. Of course, usually in all these presidential remarks, I used to say about the achievements of the university and also how this university is going to be a trendsetter for inclusive education. And I used to say that this university is a success story in democratization of education and training. But we have to travel a long way to really achieve inclusive education and inclusive growth. And I sincerely feel that interactions of this kind with eminent people like Mr. Gurcharan Das can contribute to the growth of this university for delineating a real path for this university.
Yes, I was saying you honor me, and most of all, you honor me by coming to listen to me. So I'm going to talk about India's future today, and fairly straightforward title, that prosperity will spread, but happiness will not until we fix governance. I'm going to talk about where we are coming from, where we are today, and where are we going in the future. Even though the world has just discovered it in the last few years, the growth story of India is not new. It's been going on for, well, almost 30 years now. It started in the early 80s. And what is that story? that the world is mesmerized by. First, it's a story of 28 years of high growth. Now, this is unprecedented. And if you take the average, and you'll see that the first 50 years of the 20th century, our growth rate was only 1%. Then it went up after independence to 3.5%. And then from 1980s, it doubled almost to 6%. Now, 6% is very high because the Industrial Revolution in the West took place at the rate of 3%. And finally, it is really in the last 5 years or 6 years that really India has become the second fastest growing economy in the world. And we almost did 9% for a 5-year period, which is absolutely extraordinary. At the same time, you can see that population has begun to slow down. Remember, I told you during our colonial period, our growth rate was 1%, but population was also 1. So 1 minus 1, 0 was the per capita income growth. And that's why we rightly said we were a stagnant economy in our colonial period. The growth rate between after independence jumped up for the next 30 years to 3.5%. But as you can see, population also jumped up to 2.2. So 3.5 minus 2.2 is 1.3. This is what we moaned and groaned as the Hindu rate of growth. Of course, it had nothing to do with being Hindu. It had everything to being that Nehruvian socialist license Raj rate of growth. Then from the 80s, particularly after Rajiv Gandhi, but even in the last years of Indira Gandhi, the growth rate picked up because of some liberalization that was done. And then, of course, the population declined a little bit, and in the 91 to 2000 period, it's come down to 1.8. And now most demographers, we have a survey going on right now, a census going on in the country. Most demographers predict that it's 1.5. So at the same time, literacy, as you can see, has been rising. And the middle class is the one that has been exploding in the country. In 1980, the middle class, can you believe it, was only 8% of the population. Now it is about 30 to 33%. And you can see the numbers from 65 million to 350 million. You can see that in this period of high growth, 1% of the people have been crossing the poverty line each year for 25 years. This equals to a little more than 200 million people. It's not as high as China. China has lifted 350 million people. But the fact that that such a large number, 2 crore people, have been lifted out of poverty. So as a result, we have seen real per capita income gains. And up to 2005, you can see that our per capita income almost tripled. And this I'm talking in PPP terms, which is purchase power parity. Many of you will know this. It's what a dollar will buy in India kind of thing. And it has tripled. And India is now the 4th largest economy, and it will overtake Japan between 2012 and 14 to become the 3rd largest. Now, if the story is not new, the model is unique. And what is that model? Well, first, compared to the countries that created a great industrial transformation, these were driven almost always by exports. Not only in Asia, East Asia, but also Europe when it experienced the Industrial Revolution. India's has been driven by our domestic economy more than exports. Secondly, it has been driven rather than by manufacturing, by services. It's been driven by consumption rather than investment. It's been driven, even in the case of industry, it's been driven not by the low-tech, labor-intensive industry that creates jobs. It's been driven by high-tech, capital-intensive industries, which does not create as many jobs. And also we have come out of the global crisis faster. Secondly, being services-led raises an uncomfortable question. Have we skipped the Industrial Revolution? And then if we have, how do we take people from farms to the cities? And if we do implement the SEZ policy, which now seems to have slowed down, except in a few states like Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, the rest of India, because of the problem of land acquisition, the question is, can SEZs actually be our tipping point? Now, being consumption-led is actually far more people-friendly than investment-led. And you can see in this chart that India is amongst, well, only the United States is got a higher percentage amongst the major economies of consumption as a part of GDP. And you can see we are even higher than Europe and certainly much higher than China. And this, in fact, what this does is it reflects in less inequality. If in a perfectly equal society, the Gini index would be 0. So the low number is better. And you can see our number is 33 compared to United States 41, China 45, and Brazil for 59. And so many economists have hypothesized that the world needs another big consuming economy. Now, what is the reason for our economic success? The reason for India's economic success, unlike China, is the Indian people. It is a success which has grown from below, from the market. It's been induced by entrepreneurs. China's success is induced by the state. And so the situation in India is very hard for a lot of Asians to understand, because in most Asian countries, it's been the state which has been responsible for their rise. And the result of this is that India has created almost 36 globally competitive companies. So we have a vibrant private space. More than 100 Indian companies have a market cap of over $1 billion. 1,000 Indian companies have received foreign institutional investment. That means that they are worthy of international investors. 125 Fortune 500 companies have R&D bases in India, which is a testimony to India's intellectual capital. 390 Fortune 500 companies have outsourced software development to India. And less than 2% of the loans in India, the banking loans, are now bad loans, what we euphemistically call non-performing assets, compared to more than 20% in China. Now, ironically, we used to have world-class institutions after independence. the bureaucracy, judiciary, the police. Our problem was economic growth. Now we have growth, but the institutions are letting us down. And that is why we say in despair that our economy grows at night when the government is asleep. And you can see this man who is doing a very high-tech operation. But look at the road on which he is sitting and the fact that he is generating his own electricity in order to do that. The reason for our success is largely the reforms. And I won't go over them because we know the reforms. And the amazing thing, however, is not what happened in 91, but that every government that has followed 91 has reformed, albeit very slowly, frustratingly slowly, but they have continued the reforms since then. And even slow reforms have added up. And that is why we are where we are today. And that is why India's future, the economic future, looks good. The other interesting thing is a statement made by Professor David Crystal. And he says that by 2010, India would have the world's largest number of English speakers. Now, by that he meant that India would cross the United States. And he also goes on to say that when 300 million Indians speak a word in a certain way, that will be the way the world will also speak it, because we are a global economy. And these are middle-class consumers who will be wooed by commerce, by advertising, by sellers. So, where are we today? Well, you know, we've had a global financial crisis. In this crisis, the world fell on its knees. And India also, our growth, in the case of most of the world, the growth went negative. But in the case of India and China, it remained respectable. We came down to about 6.5. We've recovered to about 7. And now this year, 10, 11, we are projecting 8.5. And I think we'll achieve it. Our pain also, when you read the stories in China and in the rest of the world, the pain has also been less. Our companies have recovered faster. What we are going now, I think, is we have entered into another golden age of growth. And most people are agreed that India will now grow at around 8%. With a population growth of, say, 1.5, you're talking about 8.5 minus 1.5, 7% per capita income growth. Now, this is incredible. This is what East Asia grew and created what they became the tigers, and within one generation, they had become middle-class countries. On a PPP basis, you can see that India's per capita income will grow $37,000. So what we are going to see in the 21st century is convergence. Now, what is convergence? Convergence is basically the incomes of the countries of the world are going to come together. And why is this going to happen? Well, the idea of convergence is a very old idea. Adam Smith talked about it. And basically, it's the intuitive idea is that if a rich country and a poor country are somehow connected through trade or investment, then the standard of living of the two will converge. Why? Well, because standard of living depends on productivity, and productivity depends on technology. And what happens is that when a rich and a poor country are connected, then the poor country just takes the technology from the rich country. Why has India become the second fastest growing economy in the world? Is because we have reaped the fruits of globalization. And so now convergence will happen. We are going to return to a world of equality that existed prior to 1750. Most of you may not know, but in 1750, before the Industrial Revolution of England, the standards of living around the world were pretty much the same. The big event of the 21st century is the rise of China and India, who will account for 45% of the world's GDP by 2030. Now, what could stop this show? The usual suspects are infrastructure. Now, the second is our fiscal deficit, and third is bad governance. However, none of these have stopped the show in the past 25 years. I began by showing to you that India has been a high growth economy for 25 years. Despite what I've said, jobs will be created in India. They will be informal, but there will be jobs will be created. Formal jobs will be created if we do labor law. But to really bring in the poor, you have to give a chance for a person who's young to get an education. There's a desperate need today for educated people. Even mechanics, even the low skill jobs, retail, all these jobs, these are going to multiply, but they will need some education. And I've told you, our record with primary education is not good. So what has been happening in India when teachers are absent and they're not doing their job in government schools? Well, the result of it is that in urban India, 54% of the children are in private schools now. And so we can use this in all the other areas. We call it public-private partnership. This is a form of public-private partnership. The government is ensuring that it's enabling every child to have an education, and then because of the competition between schools, because I bet you government schools will improve, because teachers will have to show up, they'll have to teach, they'll be competing with a private school. So I say that if India can repair its governance before China fixes its politics, it might well win the race. People make the mistake in believing that the race between India and China is as who will get rich first. The fact is both countries will get rich, both countries will become middle class, but the problem is India has liberty but bad governance. China has good governance but no liberty. Now human beings need both. For happiness you need both. And so whoever fixes its problem faster will be the winner. You know, India got democracy before capitalism, and this has made all the difference. We got democracy in 1947. We got capitalism really from 1991 onwards, as we started to dismantle the institutions of state control and state socialism. The fact that we got democracy before capitalism created pressures to redistribute before we had created a production machine. And therefore we created things like labor laws, which were far ahead of the rest of the world at the time. because as a democratic country, we believed that this was necessary. If we grew a little bit slowly, we were more likely to preserve our way of life. Whatever the Indian way of life may be, it means something different to everybody. But there is something which we think of as the Indian way of life, and we would preserve it, and therefore it is better to be an elephant growing at 8%, because the elephant has stamina, whereas a tiger runs out of air. And if we do that, I think we will be a wise elephant. Thank you.